Okay, so we're going to look now at our next section of King Lear, looking at it in terms of the AQA English Literature A Level Paper 1 Tragedy paper. And we're going to look at Act 4, Scene 5, perhaps a slightly overlooked scene, not much of massive significance happens to it. It's good length, though, for this type of question. And in this scene, we'll see Regan talking to Oswald. Now, I suppose the thing that counts against it as a potential choice for the paper is that you might argue not a lot happens in it. Although they did have a similar scene this recently in 2024 for Oswald talking to Goneril. And in a way, this scene obviously is an echo of that scene. And it's Oswald's character has been off the stage for all of Act 3, but he's prominent in Act 4. He was there at the beginning of the 4-2 when Goneril and Albany argue, and he appears at the end of the long Act 4, Scene 6 as well. And here he is in the middle of the act. So locating the passage, what we've just seen before it is two short scenes that are informational scenes really, but they're key in that they remark the return of Cordelia. First, a gentleman tells Kent about what's going on, including that Cordelia has arrived, but Franz, her husband, has gone home again, which I suppose is part of Shakespeare's attempt to maintain the audience's sympathy with Cordelia's side, because British people, English people, still held a fear of the French, really. We'd been in many wars and disputes with them over the years leading up to Shakespeare's time. And so the idea of the French invading was something that was feared and unwanted, and therefore would very much make it hard for a Jacobean audience to sympathise with Lear's and Cordelia's side if France was around too prominently. But Cordelia appears in Act 4, Scene 4, talking to the doctor, and she's showing that sympathy and compassion that the whole play seems to have been asking the audience to consider as being essentially the human quality. Now what happens next is we see that contrasted with Regan's cynical behaviour and the way Oswald behaves too. So if we've seen that compassion and that loyalty from Kent and Cordelia, we're now going to see a contrast with the cynicism and the criminal manipulations of Regan and Oswald. This is also before the very long Act 4, Scene 6, in which an awful lot happens. And we will see Gloucester thinking that he's going to the cliffs of Dover and thinking that he's able to commit suicide, and then we'll see Lear appear raving, and as Edgar says, reason, matter and impertinence mixed, reason and madness mixed. So this is quite a sort of key moment in the play, but a sort of prelude to that key scene, that big long scene. It's a short, snappy scene. So let's have a look at the actual scene then. It's outside Gloucester's castle, where a lot of the action takes place. A lot of coming and going, it seems, as we're getting ready for war. And it seems like Regan and Oswald are in the middle of a conversation. It doesn't happen all that often, actually, in the play, but it seems like we enter into a middle of a conversation. But are my brother's powers set forth? So Regan's sort of asking about how Albany and Goneril are preparing for war, basically, and so there's a practicality there. My brother, meaning my brother-in-law. You can sense her power, her business-like purposefulness, her energy, her force, her complete sense of her entitled control of the situation. And Oswald appears very subservient with just a two-word response, "I, madam." The question that they're discussing really is about, the implication is following up what we saw in 4-2 and what Oswald said about Albany in 4-2 as well, is that is Albany going to join in the war? And that's a question the audience might be quite interested in, because how can he, when what we saw in 4-2 was him being viciously antagonistic towards Goneril and dismissing everything she stood for, how can he then side with her to fight against Lear, with whom he seems to have sympathy? The answer seems to be, again, located in what I just said about the fear of the French, and that Britain has to stand up to its enemies, even if it means siding with people you're not very comfortable siding with. And these complex political decisions, obviously, were things that marked the period, the Tudor period in which Shakespeare lived. Who do you ally yourself with? And often the driving force was religious. You allied yourself in Shakespeare's lifetime with the Protestant cause, and that meant that you perhaps had what might be described as strange bedfellows. You might have sided with people that otherwise you disagreed with, but because they were Protestant, you felt you could and should be on their side. So himself there in person there, again, notice how quick and sharp that language is. There's a sense of pace and energy. I keep saying that the play needs pace, but here the pace and energy is that anticipation of war. And Regan being quite businesslike, perhaps a bit anxious. They're worried, what's going to happen? Are we going to be invaded by a large French force that will destroy us? Oswald's response is kind of humorous, I think, ironic, winking. He says, your sister is the better soldier. So there's this sense from the bad side, the cynical side, that Albany represents everything they don't, and they despise him, really. They bully him. They see him as a weak, feeble, ridiculous figure. So there's probably something happens on stage there where Oswald's sort of sidling up to Regan, really, and he knows how to flatter and win some sort of favour from Goneril, and he's now going to do the same to Regan. There's a sense that he's always on the lookout to try and please those in power, and that is ultimately his downfall at the end of the next scene. Regan switches, and this is quite, there's a lot on the subtext here that's not spoken. Lord Edmund spake not with your lord at home. Now, we know that her other big concern, and a personal concern, and perhaps a more driving concern, is her passion for and interest in Edmund. That she is perhaps more concerned about that. And she mentions Lord Edmund almost in passing, but really it's who she wants to talk about. And the subtext is that maybe she has some fears that Edmund and Goneril might be involved, as indeed they clearly are, as we saw in 4-2. And that there's a competition there for the affections of this glamorous man. Oswald's "No, madam" is in keeping with his simple responses, but of course might be deliberately tight-lipped there, as he's trying to decide who he really needs to side with here. But his loyalty to Goneril is based upon the fact that she does seem to offer him potential favours of some kind. Now he's got the letter. Now remember, Oswald, Goneril and Edmund had said that they're going to exchange letters. So he's got a letter from Oswald to Edmund, and this letter actually turns out to be the downfall of Edmund and Goneril, because it is Goneril basically saying that they should get rid of Albany, and that then they could be together, Edmund and her. And we'll hear what's in the letter, not in this scene, but in the end of the next scene when finally Edgar opens it. So Oswald, I know not, lady. He plays the loyal card there. I'm not going to spill the beans. You're not going to open it. Obviously, that's the implication. Let's have a look inside it. Now, Regan talks quite a lot in the next speech. It's the longest speech so far in the scene. And it's the sense here there must be some kind of physical activity on stage, I think, of her perhaps physically caressing and sort of flirting with Oswald, trying to tease out of him for him to give the letter to her, or to tell her if he knows what's inside. So what she says at first is perhaps not particularly relevant. It doesn't need to say it to Oswald, but it might be part of how she's using a roundabout speech in order to sort of physically encroach upon his space and make him feel that, I want, you can give me what you want. She's using her power and her sexuality to try to manipulate a foolish man who's easily diverted by the attentions of a powerful woman. But interestingly, what she does say is that Gloucester's eyes being out, it was a bad idea to let him live, because everywhere he goes, all hearts are moved against us. So they're aware that things are not going well for them in terms of the publicity, if you like. Having Gloucester staggering around, people see him and think, oh my God, what have they done to him? What a cruel regime. And so it's not getting people on their side. So Edmund's gone to put him out of his misery, and basically to dispatch his knighted life. Knighted life. Why does she need to say knighted life? Clearly he is knighted ease, as in the night, in the darkness. Typical Edmund, that's his solution. It's his father, remember. We just got to kill him. But not to really put him out of his misery, but just to get rid of him as a nuisance. Now, Oswald is aware. Why I think that something happens there physically with Regan and the way she approaches Oswald is because his answer sounds like somebody literally wriggling out of physical attentions. I must needs have to, madam, with my letter. Please don't delay me. So she's using this rather long-winded and none of that needs to be told to Oswald. What she just said. It's useful information to us. It is just something to say to him while she sort of strokes and caresses him, perhaps her fingers tickle towards the letter that's in his pocket. That kind of business, I think, is going on stage there. She continues to distract him, basically, and delay him. Our troops set forth tomorrow. Stay with us. The ways are dangerous. So don't go. Stay with us, because then the letter won't get to Edmund, and that's intercepting this relationship of Goneril and Edmund. And she, again, you can sense this in the language. I'm literally trying to wriggle out of her attentions. My lady charged my duty in this business. Oswald's like the kind of negative version of Kent, so he has this loyalty, but it's not a loyalty based upon duty and honour, but on advantage or potential advantage. So Oswald thinks that he can gain things. That's the impression you gain, and so he has got to be performed in a kind of opposite way to Kent. With Kent, this solid reliability. Oswald, this kind of constantly shifty element to him. Even here, although he's wriggling out, there's also a sense of, is he kind of making some judgments? Can you see the cogs whirring in his head? Is there something advantageous to be gained here for me by flattering Regan, by listening to Regan, by perhaps doing what Regan wants? So she returns, having just talked about general things that Oswald doesn't need to know. She returns to the letter, showing that was what was on her mind all along. Brilliant Shakespearean structure of the scene here, that what we think is being said is, of course, not really what's being said. What's being really said is, I want that letter off you. I'm really worried that that Goneril is going to get involved with Edmund. Why should she write to Edmund? Might not you transport her purposes by word? Be like something, I know not what. So again, she can't quite put it into words. She doesn't know how far she'd go. She's trying to judge it. And then we get the words that go with what I think have been the actions for a little while. I'll love thee much. Let me unseal the letters. So there's got to be a real physicality to that. Real sort of breathing in his ear and sort of flirting with him and saying, come on, you will do anything for me, won't you, sort of thing. And again, his words now stumble a bit. Madam, I had rather, he doesn't finish the sentence, partly because she interrupts, but also partly because he's probably kind of breathing rather heavily and and also pausing and wondering, what should I do here? Maybe I should give her the letter. Maybe she'll pay me money, or maybe she'll sleep with me, or something like that. Some cynical and rather obvious advantage might be available to him. So she presses home a bit now, having sort of felt that maybe he's wavering. I know your lady does not love her husband, I'm sure of that. And at her late being here, she gave strange oleads and most speaking looks. Now that oleads, or olead, I'm not even sure the correct pronunciation of it, is a great word, though. It means when you make eye contact with somebody you fancy, basically. It means flirting with the eyes. And it's a great concept there that she's noticed, and this has had to be earlier in the play. It has to have been going on for a while, that there's a real kind of eye contact and lust flashing between both Regan and Edmund and Goneril and Edmund. I know you are of her bosom. Now, what does that mean? Does it mean you're one of her close, confiding supporters, or does it mean you're sleeping with her too? You know, you've been in a relationship with her. He says, "I, madam," which, you know, that sort of professing innocence. It seems unlikely, you know, from what we've seen, that Oswald has really actually slept with Goneril, because, you know, she's too proud to do that, I would think. But like Regan, she's probably manipulated him by her power and sexuality to be more loyal to her than he might otherwise be. She drives home with that speaking understanding, you know, that phrase, casual phrase here, but of course it's very Regan. She understands, she recognises things, perhaps even sees things that aren't there. You are, I know it. And again, that certainty, which is something she's perhaps inherited from her dad, that sense that what I know and what I think is true, I'm always right. She's proven to be correct so far, that she's noticed things and spotted things and manipulated things really well. Therefore, I advise you, take this note. Now, what she means there is note this. She isn't giving him a letter. She's saying, make a note of this. Think about this. Notice it. My lord is dead. Edmund and I have talked. More convenient is he for my hand than for your ladies. You may gather more if you do find him. Pray you give him this. What she does give him is some token. Usually it's a ring or something like that. And remember, Goneril had already given him a token too. So it's a classic sort of love triangle situation here, and typical of Edmund, that he'll play off two lovers at once. So there's a real competition. This is a real echo of that beginning of 4-2, when Goneril was actually with Edmund. You know, the two of them very much doing similar things. They're little sort of twins in that way. So yeah, I can marry Edmund because I haven't got a husband, you know, whereas she still has. And that's why, actually, and it hints that what might be in the letter, what we find out is that she wants rid of the husband so she can marry Edmund. And again, desire her, call her wisdom to her, you know, tell her to wake up a little bit and realise, of course, this was something that they were constantly saying about Lear, you need to behave more wisely. Now she's chiding Goneril with the same thing, you know, just think on, you're married, I'm not. And then the fatal lines for Oswald come here when she says, if you chance to find that blind traitor, Gloucester, preferment falls on him that cuts him off. You'll get some gain, preferment. Preferment means advantage, money, reward. And so if you kill Gloucester, you'll get something. And that causes Oswald, when he does see Gloucester, to attempt to kill him. And in that effort, he's killed by Edgar. So it's a disastrous mistake. And that is prefigured there. As many things in the play are, there's a lot of pre-warnings and prefiguring of what's going to happen next. And this excites Oswald. Would that I could meet him, madam. I should show what party I do follow. So immediately the thing that most excited him, more really than the flirtatious sexuality, that kind of troubled him, but he wasn't that bothered. Not that bothered about sleeping with Regan. He's much more interested in the money bit. Oh, I'm going to get some money, is what he's imagining. And that really excites him. And so he dashes off to do that, and perhaps finds the energy to extricate himself from Regan's clasp. So fare thee well is sort of perhaps ironically said as he runs off, going off to look for Gloucester. She feels that she's done some work there anyway, that she's perhaps put into the head of Goneril's key servant that you can't have him, and that might get back to Goneril. Now this is all going to come to a head in Act 5. We see it all play out fairly rapidly, really, because we don't see a lot more of Goneril and Regan. They appear at the beginning of Act 5, just before the battle, and then after the battle, their conflict is resolved, really, with the poisoning and the suicide. So what we've seen here is just cynicism in action, manipulation, but a sense of a tense build-up towards something, threats against the good characters still lingering, but it's an uncertainty of how it's going to unfold, that maybe this battle will go the way of the good guys, and because Regan doesn't seem that confident. And we've got another continuation of Albany's story there about how he's going to move from being just one of the associates of Goneril and Regan to being a total opposite to them, and the justice that kind of manages to give Goneril, Regan, and Edmund to some extent what they deserve. So ultimately, this scene, of course, is Regan's scene, and it's her typical manipulative cynicism. And, presumably Cornwall's only been dead a few days at most, if that. Maybe only a day. And she's already, totally dismissed him from her consideration. He's only interested in one thing, which is getting Edmund.